Is that Godzilla?
Welcome everybody, this is Adam the Movie Guy, and on this special episode I want to talk about all things Godzilla. Being one of the most famous movie monsters to ever be put to screen, and having been around since 1954, Godzilla has a special place in my heart and is my second favorite movie monster, right behind King Kong. Now I wanted to do a special episode since Godzilla has been around for over 70 years at this point, and the mark he left on not just cinema but pop culture is something that's just truly incredible. I mean, you can find any jackass off the street who never seen a single Godzilla movie in their entire life, but they will still know who Godzilla is. I mean, how the fuck do you not know who Godzilla is? I mean, not knowing Godzilla is an alien concept to me. But anyway, I'm going to touch upon the history of Godzilla's creation, including his creators and inspirations. Then I will talk about how flexible Godzilla is as a character, his general appearance, physical attributes that vary wildly between films if you've seen them. I mean, seriously, look at all the different faces and body types he's had since '54. And the face he had in the film Son of Godzilla, I mean, just look it up. Just, holy shit, that was an ugly fucking design. Ugh. Anyway, after talking about all that, I'll speed through all the films by release date and say a few things about them. Next, I'll get into some of the unmade Godzilla movies that would have been pretty interesting if they saw the light of day. Following that, I'll give a top 10 ranking of my favorite Godzilla monsters with 3 honorable mentions. Then, I'll give my top 10 favorite Godzilla films. Now, before I get started, I want to dedicate this episode to my Uncle Steve, who passed away back on my birthday at the end of August. He, along with my Uncle Ray, got me into Godzilla films when I was 7 years old. I remember visiting them back in Chicago, and their place would be covered in old, movie and TV merchandise from the 60s and 70s, including every single Godzilla film on VHS. Now, I know some of you young kids don't know what the fuck VHS is, and that really saddens me, but I feel so fucking old. Anyway, I remember the first one to catch my eye was King Kong versus Godzilla. I asked to borrow it, and after watching the movie, I fell in love with both Godzilla and King Kong. And the funny thing about that is that it was both the first Godzilla film and first King Kong film I ever saw before even seeing their original debut films. I love you, Uncle Steve, and I hope you're watching Godzilla fuck shit up in Japan up in heaven. Now, let's get into the origins of Godzilla's creation. Starting off with Godzilla's creation, also apologies ahead of time if I butcher these names. I could barely speak English, let alone pronounce Japanese names, so bear with me. Anyway, it all began with Toho Film Studios, a very prominent Japanese film production studio, with one of their producers, Tomoyuki Tanaka, on a flight back home to Japan after a failed pitch meeting with the Indonesian government not going for it. Anyway, Tanaka was looking out the window into the water below when he got the idea of a monster surfacing up from the depths and attacking Japan. What helped spurn this idea was the American films Beast from 20,000 Fathoms that came out the previous year, as well as the re-release of the 1933 classic King Kong, which was making a shit ton of money in Japan. One other big inspiration was the unfortunate and tragic incident that occurred called the Lucky Dragon No. 5 fishing boat incident. Now, hold on as I whip out old Wikipedia for this one. Here it is. Per Wikipedia, it was a Japanese tuna fishing boat that got contaminated with the nuclear fallout from the United States Castle Bravo test in Bikini Atoll on March 1st, 1954. The crew all suffered acute radiation syndrome for weeks, but all recovered with the exception of one, the chief radio man, Kubiyama Aikachi? Aikachi. Yeah, I'm going to go with Aikachi, who unfortunately died in September from complications due to radiation sickness. This was referenced in the opening scene with the fishing boat of the first Godzilla film, or Gojira, as it was originally titled. Fun little fact, the Gojira name, or title, whatever the fuck you want to say, is a combination of two Japanese words, gorilla and whale. The name Godzilla was used for international markets and created by Toho Studios, with God showcasing the creature's power and Zilla due to his lizard-like features. The name quickly became more popular and was official by the time of the second movie came around in '56, as well as the first film's American edited version titled Godzilla, King of the Monsters. The producer Tanaka handpicked Ishio Honda to direct the film, and Godzilla's design was co-made by Teizo Toshimitsu and Akira Watanabe. Early designs went from being a giant octopus to a gorilla whale-like mammal monster to finally a hybrid atomic dinosaur monster. Godzilla's physical design was based after a combination of the T-Rex for the basic skeleton, the iguanodon with his arms, and with the dorsal fins of a stegosaurus. They toyed with the idea of making Godzilla's head shaped like a mushroom cloud to make the parallels between the atomic bomb even more obvious, but thank God they ditched that idea for a more dinosaur-like head, because I saw sketches of that design, and Godzilla's head looks like a cock with eyes and teeth in that version. Jesus Christ, I'm glad they didn't go with that. They also made Godzilla's skin texture look more like keloid scars from the atomic bomb, and throw in some atomic breath and boom, you got the Godzilla design we all know and love. Now, Toho originally wanted to use stop-motion animation to bring Godzilla to life, which is the same process used for the King Kong film that came out in 1933. However, it was expensive as all hell, so they went with suitimation, a guy in a Godzilla suit. Haru Nakajima was the lucky man with the honor of portraying Godzilla. Unfortunately, the suit was absolute hell to wear. It weighed over 220 pounds. He had to carry a battery between his legs to operate the eyes and lights for Godzilla's atomic breath. And it was extremely hot, and he could only wear it a few minutes at a time. Despite all of this, he went on to play Godzilla for almost 20 years until his last film as the big man in 1972's Godzilla vs. Gigan. Nakajima passed away in 2017. Rest in peace to this legend. Well, that's all for the creation and inspiration segment. There's a lot more info about Godzilla's creation, but I wanted to just give the most basic gist I could for people who had no idea behind his origins at all. So let's get into the next segment. Now on to Godzilla's characterization. In the first few Godzilla films, he was a straight-up villain who was a force of nature. And also in the first movie, he left areas he attacked bathed in radiation, so if him directly stepping on you didn't kill you, his radioactive footprint did. Fast forward a few movies to 1964's Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, which is the first film to make Godzilla a hero and also introduce his arch-nemesis, King Ghidorah. From that point on, Godzilla became gradually more and more heroic all the way through his run in the 60s and 70s era of films. Godzilla became the main antagonist once again in the 1984 film The Return of Godzilla, which ignored all the other sequels and was a direct sequel to the original 1954 film. This Godzilla was bigger and meaner than ever, with him absolutely devastating Japan once again. Then he was a kinda sorta anti-villain when other monsters came around and he had when he had much bigger fish to fry other than humanity. And then fast forward to his current modern American depiction in the MonsterVerse series of films, where they take the concept of Godzilla being a force of nature and nature's natural way of keeping order between the other giant monsters, or titans, as they're referred to in the MonsterVerse series of films. While he's not against humanity, he's pretty indifferent to them since his priority is the balance of nature and keeping the other titans under control. This is honestly my favorite characterization since it keeps Godzilla heroic, but in a more neutral sense where his morality is significantly more alien than a human being's concept of morality. And he's still intimidating as all hell. Monster vs. Godzilla perfectly walks the line between a heroic neutral but destructive force of nature. Meanwhile, Toho is back in the game when they came out with 2 new Godzilla films released concurrently with the new American-made MonsterVerse films. They both revert Godzilla back to his original villainous incarnation as a destructive beast who just lays waste to Japan without a hint of remorse. The first was the 2016 film Shin Godzilla, which has probably the most disturbing physical depiction of the character. More on that later. And then came the masterpiece that was the 2023 film Godzilla Minus One. Fucking incredible. But I'll get to that soon enough. When it comes to Godzilla as a character, ultimately, he is extremely flexible, and he could be anything you need him to be, whether it's a villain, a hero, or something in between. He just makes it work. Godzilla is truly something special. Now on to his physical description changing throughout the years. Now it's always the same basic shape or form, but the exact details and coloring of Godzilla vary wildly. The suit used in Godzilla Raids Again is the stuff of fucking nightmares, and even has an analog horror series on YouTube called The Man in the Suit. It's some creepy shit, and I highly recommend listeners to check it out. He's typically depicted being various shades of brownish gray with blue atomic breath, although that one time he was depicted as green in the movies was Godzilla 2000 with orange-red atomic breath, which honestly looks kinda cool. When Marvel Comics licensed the rights to Godzilla, they also depicted him as being green and replaced his atomic breath with the more generic fire breath. Side note, this is a huge misconception with Godzilla with people who don't watch the movies and always thinks he shoots out fire. But let me set the record straight. It's not fire. It's pure concentrated atomic energy in ray form that he typically uses to either superheat things or against other monsters. It usually acts as a superheated concussive blast. Whenever there's a parody of Godzilla or a satire, they always replace it with generic fire breath, which probably leads a lot of people to that misconception. Then there's Godzilla's depiction in Shin Godzilla, and I gotta say,
what is that? What the fuck is that? What is it?
This fucking thing is an abomination, and I mean that as a compliment. They take the whole concept of atomic radiation mutating Godzilla, and they run with it to the point where Godzilla is this Lovecraftian Cthulhu-like creature who keeps evolving throughout the film. In his final form is the stuff of nightmares, with his whole body being scarred. Its atomic ray is something out of a horror film, and Godzilla is acting like it's in constant physical agony due to his mutating body. And the scariest part, its final form he has for the rest of the movie is strongly implied not to be his real final form, and that it would just keep mutating until he's something completely incomprehensible to man. It wasn't even killed at the end of the film just to put it in, it was just put in suspended animation or just frozen or some shit like that. Jesus Christ, talk about an existential nightmare if you live in Japan. Any moment that fucking thing can wake up in the United States in the film made it sparkling clear that if it wakes up again, they're gonna once again nuke the shit out of Japan to try to kill it for good. Notice how I keep referring to Shin Godzilla as it instead of him? Well, look it up and you will understand why. And another thing Shin means God and a couple other words in Japanese depending on the kanji is written. So this Godzilla name or title, I guess, is translated as literally God Godzilla. Now, let me tell you something. There is nothing holy about this fucking thing. If anything, it should be called Akuma or Ma Godzilla, which mean devil or demon in Japanese. That would go pretty hard as far as titles go, to be honest. I think Godzilla's most iconic appearance was the one he had in the 80s and 90s film series, aka the Heisei era, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Now, to explain what that means is that the Godzilla series of films are split into different eras named after the Japanese emperors who were in power during the film's production. The first era of film was the Showa era of films that were from 1954 to 1975. The next era was the Heisei era of films that were from 1984 to 1995. Following the Heisei era was the Millennium era, which breaks the emperor name pattern due to being in the 2000s, new millennium, makes sense. This was from 1999 to 2004. The current era we are in now is called the Reiwa era, which started in 2016 to the current year of 2025. I know I technically missed the anniversary year by a few days by the time this episode releases, but fuck it, it's close enough. This episode is now the 70 years and some change anniversary special. Now back to Godzilla's Heisei appearance. It's the one everyone born in the 60s to the late 90s associates Godzilla's physical appearance to be in their heads. I know his appearance in these films gets tweaked a bit, but the overall appearance is roughly the same, especially the outline of Godzilla. Hell, that's the version of Godzilla used for Toho Studios' logo, and even the Godzilla Hotel in Japan based that design off his Heisei-era appearances. Now, his current appearance in the American-made films in the MonsterVerse is honestly becoming iconic in its own right, and is a great amalgamation of past designs while doing something unique to his design to stand out. Meanwhile, Toho released a god-tier design that came out December of 2023, which was the Godzilla's -1 design. A perfect throwback to the Showa era, and while he was all CGI, it had the classic man-in-a-suit feel that I absolutely freaking love. I'm going to praise Godzilla -1 more, trust me. One last thing I wanted to touch on when it comes to his physical description is his height increases over the years. Now, Godzilla's height increases has a very simple explanation. Toho increased his size when the overall skyline of their cities got significantly taller over the years and didn't want Godzilla or their other monsters to look too dwarfed by all the other buildings. Godzilla's height in the Showa era of films, through the 50s, through the 70s, was 165 feet tall. Then, in the first half of the Heisei era, the 80s era, his height increased to 262 feet. Then he got buffed to 328 feet in the 90s films. Then come the Millennium era, they shrunk Godzilla down to 180 feet until his final Millennium era film in 2004, where he was once again 328 feet. Now, fast forward 10 years to 2014, the American-made Godzilla film. I'm not counting, the 98 film. Less said about that, the better. I'll probably touch upon that in the future. But anyway, Godzilla's height was once again increased to 354 feet. Toho decided to get back in the game and came out with Shin Godzilla in 2016, which had Godzilla at a staggering 389 feet. Now, the Americans didn't want to be outdone for size, I suppose, so they fired back by increasing Godzilla's height in their 2019 sequel film, Godzilla King of the Monsters. Godzilla stood exactly at 393 feet tall, and that is his current height in the MonsterVerse film series. This is the tallest Godzilla has been depicted in live-action films. I'm not counting the comic books or anime heights. Finally, the Godzilla -1 height brought Godzilla back to his original 165 feet standing, which makes sense since it's a period piece set in the 40s during the very end and 2 years after World War II. Well, that's all for Godzilla's physical depiction. There's so much more to say, but that would take an entire episode to break down every Godzilla physical depictions over the years. So I'm going to stop it here and let's get into the next segment. Alright, I'm going to speed run through the films by stating their title, release year, and I'll say a few words about them. Note, I'm only going to stick with their original Japanese release year for the Toho-made films, and the only American versions I'll mention will be the ones that have something interesting changed about them. So, let's get started. The first Godzilla film ever made, Gojira, released in 1954. What needs to be said about this groundbreaking classic? I mean, the film's themes about the dangers of nuclear weapons having devastating consequences hold up to this very day, and the horror and aftermath of the atomic bomb droppings was still fresh in the minds of the Japanese. Godzilla is an unstoppable force in this movie, and it takes a literal brand new super weapon to actually kill him. This film will forever be in legend. Next up is the sequel, Godzilla Raids Again, released in 1956. This is the first Godzilla versus movie with him facing off against another giant monster, which is Anguirus. I used to be more negative about this film, and while it was an overall step down from the original, I've warmed up to it over the years, and it probably has the creepiest Godzilla suit ever made, which was the inspiration for a lot of the YouTube Godzilla analog horror series that I mentioned earlier, which you guys really have to check out if you ever get the chance. Next is King Kong vs. Godzilla, released in 1962. This movie will forever have a special place in my heart for being both the first Godzilla film and the first King Kong film I ever saw. It was both the third movie in both franchises and also the first ones to be filmed and released in Technicolor. The film was a satire of commercialization and business with the executive character Mr. Taco and starred both future James Bond beauties Akiko oh my god, I cannot read these fucking names. Akiko Wakabayashi. Yeah, I'm gonna go with that. And Miyahama as the leading ladies, who went on to both star in my second favorite James Bond film, You Only Live Twice. I absolutely love this film, and as much as I love Godzilla, I said he was my second favorite monster, and unfortunately for him, my number one favorite is King Kong. He was portrayed as the more heroic monster of the film. It was a bit of an underdog against Godzilla. But against the odds, he actually was the first monster to ever defeat Godzilla, and that's on record. I know some of you are going to say it was a tie at the end, but don't feed me that bullshit because Toho themselves said Kong won. And yes, I know decades later they tried to walk it back and say it was a tie, but that doesn't count, and I'll fucking fight you on that. Besides, just let Kong have a fucking win for once, especially since he gets beaten 3 goddamn times by Godzilla in the MonsterVerse series. Legendary Entertainment, if you can hear me, if they ever fight in the series, have Kong win one fucking fight against Godzilla. Because I feel like he's getting lowballed after the third loss at this point. I also want to briefly mention that the American cut of the film that was released in the United States in 1963, they edited at least several to 10 minutes out of the film, and they completely swapped out the music and took a lot of the satire out and tried to make it more somewhat serious. Although, in the case of the music, I have a soft spot for it because the soundtrack they put in is literally the same music from Creature from the Black Lagoon. Look it up. True story. Next up is Mothra vs. Godzilla, released in 1964. Putting Mothra and Godzilla together in one film was fucking genius because they go together so damn well, whether they're enemies or allies. The action's great, the Godzilla suit is great and intimidating, and the Shobijin twins, or fairies as they're sometimes referred to, are so damn iconic and crucial to the character of Mothra. Following that film is Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, which also released in 1964, which introduced one of Godzilla's arch-enemies, the space dragon world destroyer, King Ghidorah. It's also the first time Rodan, another favorite monster of mine, encountered Godzilla. Throwing Mothra in a team-up and you got a fun watch in the first time Godzilla took a step into being a somewhat heroic character, or at least the anti-villain of the film. He still kinda hated humanity, but he hated Ghidorah even more, so at least it worked out for us. Next is Invasion of the Astral Monster, coming out in 1965, once again pitting Godzilla and Rodan against Ghidorah, and aliens getting involved to take over the Earth with mind-controlling the monsters. The film was okay, but I kind of missed Mothra because she unfortunately didn't make it this time around, but they at the very least brought back Rodan for another team-up, so we got that. Next up, and in my opinion, an underrated and overly hated film, Ebirah, Horror of the Deep, released in 1966, aka Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. This film pitted Godzilla against the giant mutant sea shrimp Ebirah and had a fun island adventure with a young man named Rhoda looking for his brother who was lost at sea, and he brings and makes along some new friends along the way with two Japanese guys and a roguish international thief. They, along with a beautiful native girl named Dio from Mothra's home, Infant Island, face off against the terrorist organization, the Red Bamboo Army, who enslaved the half of the natives of Infant Island. Now, this was originally supposed to be a King Kong film, but Toho was butting heads with King Kong, American studio owners, and Rankin Bass, who wanted to do something different, so Toho said, okay, fuck it, we'll put Godzilla in it instead. The original title was even going to be Operation Crusoe, King Kong versus Ebirah, but the problem is that they didn't change the script at all, and Godzilla acts like King Kong with his mannerisms, getting woken up by lightning, and falling for a human woman. Godzilla just isn't Godzilla in the movie, and a lot of fans shit on the movie for it, but honestly, I love King Kong. Oh my god, I can't talk. I love King Kong, so I can look past that. And if I had a time machine, one of the many things I would do is go back in time and get Toho and Rankin Bass to put King Kong in both this film and the next I'm going to talk about. Last thing I want to say is that the fun 1960s beach-sounding soundtrack is pretty fantastic, I gotta say, and it kind of gives you that 60s swinging vibe. Following that is the Son of Godzilla film, released in 1967. The plot follows a team of scientists joined by a reporter. My god. See, this is why I need to write better scripts, because I can't fucking talk. See, I just lost my place. Where was I? Let me fix this shit. Hang on, everybody. I'm trying to scroll down and find my script that I wrote. You know, it's funny. I write a script, but I literally only follow 85% of it anyway. At least that last 25%, I just go off on tangents and just start saying random shit. Here it is. Alright, back to what I was saying. Son of Godzilla, 1967. The plot follows a team of scientists joined by a reporter named Goro on an island and are trying to conduct an important weather experiment while trying to survive the island's monsters, including Godzilla. Meanwhile, the reporter gets close to a beautiful island girl named Seiko, who's been living on the island for years after her famous scientist's father died on it after being stranded together. They discover a giant egg, and hatching out of it is a baby Godzilla who the Big G himself teaches how to defend himself against the other giant monsters on the island. This film is very fun. I absolutely love island adventure movies. I love Tarzan, I love King Kong, so that's probably why I love this movie like the last, because it also feels a lot more like a King Kong film with the Island of Monsters vibe, as well as Seiko, or Kiko as she's called in the American cut of the film, as a female Tarzan-esque character played by the very beautiful Beverly Mida. Her relationship with the reporter Goro is very wholesome and playful, with a very subtle approach to a budding romance between the two, especially with the two being seen regularly together. Kiko wearing his shirt, playfully racing around the island and teasing him, and just giving him a glomping hug after Goro said he wants Kiko to come back with him to Japan, and she's overjoyed. Hell, I wish their characters came back in at least one more Godzilla film. As for Godzilla Jr., or Minya as he's called by fans, The suit is fucking ugly, but in almost so ugly it's cute sort of fashion, and the scene of Minya just jumping on Godzilla's tail or being dragged by Godzilla always makes me laugh. And for the Big G himself, he's such a tired dad in this movie, it's funny and probably relatable to a lot of fathers. This movie often gets shit on like the previous, and if you hate it, I understand, but having said that, if you ever say these past two movies are worse than All Monsters Attack, also known as Godzilla's Revenge, we're gonna have some motherfucking problems, I'll tell you that much. Calm down, Adam. Calm down. Next up is the all-star film of Destroy All Monsters, released in 1968. What needs to be said about this giant monster mash? So many films have tried to ape this movie's vibe, and for good reason. You have damn near up to that point every major Toho kaiju in the film, just kicking ass in an epic story with Godzilla and a bunch of other monster friends completely curb-stopping King Ghidorah like it's a fucking hood movie from the early 2000s. It wasn't even a fight, it was just a beatdown, and it was great. Next up, oh my god. I hate this fucking movie. Okay. Next up is the cancer-inducing film that is All Monsters Attack, released in 1969. Jesus Christ. This movie was the fucking shits, and it shouldn't have been made. I tried giving it a chance, but holy fuck. It's as boring as watching goddamn paint dry. They use stock footage from Son of Godzilla and Ebra, and the story itself doesn't fucking matter, so it was all in a dumbass kid's head that you don't give a fuck about, so none of the events actually happened. And the fucking English cut made me want to put a gun in my fucking mouth. This sums up my feelings for the movie perfectly.
I think this movie is giving me AIDS. I think if I took a blood test right now, I would test positive for AIDS.
I'm saying sodomize me with a goddamn rusty fucking fishing knife.
Now to get the taste of ass out of my mouth. The next film is Godzilla vs. Hedorah, released in 1971. This movie, while not great, I feel doesn't get enough appreciation for its bizarre and freaky visuals and a pretty damn good monster who's made out of pollution, and the film's environmental message was pretty good considering the time it was set in. I personally would love to see a modern-day take on Hedorah with today's effects. Next up, Godzilla vs. Gigan, released in 1972. The film was okay, but like the previous film, the best thing about it is the new monster Gigan, who was a giant cyborg hybrid monster, and he became an instant classic, especially with those fucking funny hook hands. Next is Godzilla vs. Megalon, released in 1973, which is in the same boat as the previous two. However, not only did Megalon make a pretty fun villain, the film also introduced Jet Jaguar, the Ultraman ripoff and an instant icon of the Godzilla series. Damn, I really wish they'd bring him back someday. Next up, the film that introduced my absolute favorite Godzilla enemy, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla in 1974. This movie had great action, a fun story. It had one of the big three of Godzilla's arch rivals, Mechagodzilla, which gave Godzilla one hell of a fight. Oh, and King Caesar, although silly looking, was kind of cool. Granted, he was also kind of fucking useless as Godzilla did most of the work and he got his ass kicked. Mechagodzilla is a true menace in this fucking movie. And the last film of the Showa era and a direct sequel to Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla would be Terror of Mechagodzilla, released in 1975, which obviously brings back Mechagodzilla, and Titanosaurus, a new dinosaur, reddish dinosaur-like monster with a kind of cool-looking fin. I mean, he had a cool design, but the film was kind of a step down from the previous one, although the final fight was pretty entertaining. Well, that was all for the Showa era of Godzilla films. Next up is the Heisei era, kicking off in the 1980s. Holy shit, I still have so many films to go through. There is 38 fucking films in this series. It is staggering. I need a breath. I'll be right back. Kicking off the Heisei era of films is The Return of Godzilla, released in 1984. This film served as a reboot of the series and ignored all the sequels and served as a direct sequel to the original 1954 Gojira film. This was a genius idea and brought back Godzilla to his dark and serious roots, and having Godzilla be the villain again was fantastic. His redesign was pretty iconic as well, the film also having Cold War tension between the United States and the Soviet Union, with Japan caught in the middle, also brought a sense of interesting human and political drama. The American cut of the film brought back Raymond Burr as Steve Martin, which was a very nice touch. Following that is the 1989 film Godzilla vs. Biollante. This film had a pretty tragic but well-written story, with the Godzilla villain Biollante being a combination of plant and Godzilla DNA, which mutates into a gigantic plant abomination. Biollante was a fantastic monster design and a villain in need of another appearance. Next up is Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, released in 1991. This film introduced time travel to the Godzilla series, which honestly was kinda interesting, and exploring Godzilla's mutated origins was pretty fun. And we get 2 Ghidorah fights, with the second one being Godzilla vs. Mecha King Ghidorah, which is pretty badass. Overall, while there's a couple of plot holes, it was a pretty fun watch, and I definitely want to get back to it one day. Next up is Godzilla vs. Mothra, released in 1992. Godzilla once again finds himself fighting Mothra, but this time around Mothra got double trouble, with also butting heads with her evil twin brother Batra. This all leads to a final fight with Mothra and Batra teaming up to stop Godzilla, and the film was a great return for the queen of the monsters Mothra, and giving her an evil brother was a great idea. Next is Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, released in 1993. Yeah, I know the title is confusing since this ignores the continuity of the Showa era, but the film itself kicks ass with a great redesign for Mechagodzilla, and bringing back Baby Godzilla with a much better design helps a lot, if I'm being honest. And I can't forget the return of Rodan as an enemy then ally to Godzilla with a nice redesign himself. Next after that is Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla, released in 1994. This film was average overall, but I really loved the design of Space Godzilla with the crystals, and I think he can make another comeback in a new modern-day film someday. Mogera, while kind of fun, is no Mechagodzilla, to be honest. Also, that red spiral heat ray that Godzilla finishes off Space Godzilla with was pretty damn awesome. Red is my favorite color, after all. And last, the final film of the Heisei era, and the best one, Godzilla vs. Destroyer, releasing in 1995. This film was great from start to finish. The action special effects were fantastic. Godzilla's new burning form was stunning, and the villain is absolutely perfect in the form of Destroyer, whose origins being created from the very thing that killed Godzilla, the Oxygen Destroyer from the very first film in the series, genius. Godzilla dying at the end of the film was such a sad and beautiful moment that even the humans seems pretty sad despite, Godzilla terrorizing their country for decades. He was still part of their identity as a nation. Although the film ends on a silver lining because Godzilla Jr. seemed to be posed to take up that mantle as a much more heroic interpretation of the character. Well, that's all for the Heisei era of films. Next up is the Millennium era. Kicking off the Millennium era is probably the most controversial Godzilla film, which was the 1998 Roland Emmerich-directed, American-made Godzilla, starring Matthew Broderick. Now, okay, let me start off by saying I actually liked this movie. The plot and characters were fun, and the action is late 90s cheesy in a great way. I actually liked the design of the new Zilla monster in it. Notice how I referred to the monster as Zilla instead of Godzilla, because there's 2 good reasons for that. With the first reason being it just wasn't Godzilla, and every time I watch this film, it's my headcanon that the monster is mistaken for the real Godzilla, and he's mistakenly referred to as him in this movie. The second reason is, well, Toho Studios absolutely hated the film so much that when the rights reverted back to Toho from the American studio, TriStar, back to Toho after they failed to start working on a sequel, they rebranded the monster as Zilla. They took the god out of Godzilla, just called him Zilla, and had him fight the real Godzilla in Godzilla Final Wars, only to have the real Godzilla kill him off damn near immediately in the movie. Over the years, fans have significantly warmed up to this movie, and while not Godzilla, it's still a fun giant monster movie, and the design of Zilla is pretty damn cool. Next is Toho returning to their own Godzilla series with the 1999 film Godzilla 2000. This film was alright with a pretty cool redesign for Godzilla, coloring him green instead of the usual gray, and giving him red atomic breath instead of blue, which also looked pretty cool. And the villain Orga was kinda interesting, and him trying to swallow Godzilla whole was fucking disturbing. Next is Godzilla vs. Megaguirus, released in 2000. This film had an interesting creepy bug monster and started the trend that each movie in the Millennium era completely ignores the continuity with each other. Next up is Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack, coming out in 2001. Holy shit, that's a long title, and the only things I can remember about this movie was just how the Godzilla in this version was the embodiment of Japanese soldiers that died in World War II, and it had a really creepy-ass suit design. Following that is Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, releasing in 2002. Mechagodzilla is referred to Kiryu in the film, and he's actually pretty cool with his design being pretty damn sleek. Although, to be honest with you guys, the only two Millennium-era films I actually give a fuck about are Godzilla Final Wars and, ironically, the once universally hated 98 American Godzilla film. The others I saw only 2 times or once in these past 2 films cases, and they honestly just never really appealed to me, which is why I don't sound as enthusiastic compared to the previous 2 eras of Godzilla films. Next is Godzilla Tokyo SOS, which was released in 2003, and I honestly can't remember jack shit about this one other than the fact that Mothra is once again back. Maybe I'll watch it again someday, maybe I'm just being a dick towards it. Either way, I never really give a fuck about this one. Let's just get on to the one I actually did give a fuck about and is my favorite one of this era. The final film of the Millennium era, which is Godzilla Final Wars, released in 2004. This movie fucks so hard in terms of action and spectacle. This is the most live-action anime style the films have ever gotten, and it's awesome. There's also a lot of Power Rangers and Matrix vibes in there as well. Godzilla is on the fucking warpath in this film, fighting damn near every monster he's faced since the Showa era, and even has a hysterical encounter with his American counterpart Zilla, where the true Godzilla kills him immediately. As for Godzilla's design himself, he looks almost perfect, with the suit design having a great, sleek, muscled, intimidating look. Well, that's all for the Millennium era. Sorry I didn't sound that enthusiastic. Like I said before, I only give a fuck about 2 of the films in this era. But thankfully, we're getting on to probably the best era since the Showa era. Let's fast forward 10 years in the future when Godzilla makes his glorious return to cinema in the Reiwa/Monsterverse era. Starting off the current era of Godzilla films is the second American attempt with Godzilla, released in 2014 by Legendary Entertainment Studios, and starring Bryan Cranston, Aaron Taylor Johnson, and Elizabeth Olsen. This film was an unforgettable watch in the theaters, with everyone hyped up to see Godzilla, as the film takes what is referred to as the Jaws approach, where you only get to see small glimpses of, the big man until you get the big reveal. And my God, what a reveal it was. I saw this in an IMAX theater when I was 17, and let me tell you something. The audio to this film was godlike. The big reveal with Godzilla was built up perfectly, and when he let out that iconic roar, the whole theater shook. I was in awe when they panned up from the bottom, from his feet, all the way up to his face, and he let out that roar. Holy shit. While I didn't really care for Aaron Taylor Johnson's character, and was pissed Bryan Cranston got killed off halfway through the movie, The return of Dr. Serizawa was fantastic and paid respect to the original film. Only this time, the Doctor is more of an ally to Godzilla. My favorite moment was during the final climax of the fight between Godzilla and the Mutos, the new villains. The whole film took a grounded and fairly realistic approach to Godzilla, and until that moment in the film, it didn't look like Godzilla was going to have his iconic atomic breath in this movie. But then, right when it looks like the Muto is going to kill off Aaron Johnson's character, the whole screen starts to glow blue, and every single person in that theater yelled with glee, and I was smiling ear to fucking ear because we all knew what was coming next. Godzilla's dorsal fins light up blue. He takes a huge inhale, and then he blasts that Muto in its stupid fucking face with his atomic breath. It was beautiful. Overall, it was a very solid start to a new Godzilla era of films, and it gave Godzilla the respect and reverence he rightfully deserves. Next up, Toho once again throws their hat in the ring with another reboot of their Godzilla series called Shin Godzilla in 2016. Now, let me tell you something. This is a fucked up interpretation of Godzilla that is an existential nightmare with his jacked up appearance and constant evolution. This film served as a metaphor of the Fukushima disaster that hit Japan, and the slow, bureaucratic response to the disaster was absolutely shredded and mocked in the movie. And the atomic breath scene is the stuff of nightmares. This Godzilla looks like it just wants to fucking die. And dear God, if you took a look at it, you wouldn't blame him.
What the f*** is that?
Next movie is the follow-up to the American 2014 film, Godzilla King of the Monsters, released in 2019, that starred Millie Bobby Brown, Vera Farmiga, if I can say that name right, and what's his fucking nuts from the King Kong 2005 movie? Kyle Chandler, I think that's his name. Yeah, he plays the father of Millie Bobby Brown's character in this movie, who has a beef against Godzilla. Just the usual shit. Godzilla was indirectly responsible for his kid getting killed in the fight between him and the Muto in the previous film. I mean, you have 300-something foot monsters. Go fucking figure. But anyway, this movie was so epic and is a perfect modern version of Destroy All Monsters. You have Mothra, Rodan, and King Ghidorah fighting, and you got a new burning Godzilla form and an amazing epic score. This is just a perfect monster brawl movie and a hell of a good time. My favorite scene in the entire movie is Rodan waking up from the volcano and absolutely wrecking Mexico. Next up is the rematch decades in the making with Godzilla versus Kong in 2021 by Legendary Studios. This film was a roller coaster ride from start to finish. Kong was the heart and soul of the movie and had all the emotional moments with a young Skull Island native girl named Gia. He and Godzilla's species are ancient rivals, and they're both alpha titans, as stated in the lore of the new films, which explains their animosity towards one another. Their fight in Hong Kong was fucking epic, and I was rooting for Kong to come out on top against Godzilla. But sadly, he does get defeated fair and square by the Big G. I'm not mad, though. But that's not all, because after defeating Kong, Godzilla faces off against my favorite Godzilla villain, Mechagodzilla. And Mechagodzilla absolutely wrecks Godzilla's shit. On one hand, I was kind of happy since it was karma for Godzilla defeating Kong. On the other hand, I still loved Godzilla too and didn't want him to be killed, which he almost was until Kong came into the rescue, saving Godzilla, and together they defeat Mechagodzilla with Kong landing the killing blow. They both end up calling a truce, and Godzilla goes back into the sea, while Kong finally finds a home in the Hollow Earth, which is basically a whole nother world inside of the Earth, like the film Journey to the Center of the Earth. The ending actually touched me on an emotional level since we as film goers are, pretty much used to seeing him die in half of his damn movies, and he never truly got a happy ending. In this, he gets that with the film ending on Kong and the little girl Gia happily ever after, and Kong finally home. Kong roars triumphantly and does the classic chest beat while the perfect song plays, ending the movie. Fantastic versus movie and perfect ending, with both of the title characters given the love and respect they deserve, being two of the greatest monsters in all of fiction. Next film is the god-level masterpiece that is Godzilla -1, released in 2023 by Toho Studios, doing another Godzilla reboot. This is a period piece set during the very end and 2 years after World War II, following a kamikaze pilot named Shikishima with survivor's guilt after not doing his duty to sacrifice his life, despite Japan clearly about to lose the war anyway at that point in time. When he returns home after the war to a destroyed Tokyo and his parents were killed during the United States firebombing the absolute piss out of Tokyo, dear God, it was actually really depressing. He begins supporting a beautiful young woman named Noriko and a baby girl named Akiko she rescued, whose parents died during the bombings. Along with their neighbors Sumiko, who lost her children, they all become a makeshift family while Shikishima befriends his new colleagues at this new job he has of disposing underwater mines left off the coast of the Japanese homeland. Unfortunately, as soon as all the characters begin to pick up the pieces of their lives that were shattered after the war, Godzilla, now mutated from the Bikini Atoll bomb test the United States was conducting, rises from the depths and starts laying waste to warships off the coast of Japan and makes his way inland and absolutely wreaks havoc in this nearby city that the current main characters live near. With the United States not being able to get involved due to rising tension with the Soviets and Japan no longer having a fully functioning army, it's up to the main characters and the surviving Navy vets of the war to put an end to Godzilla's rampage. This film is absolutely incredible, between the characters, the emotional story, the special effects, and Godzilla looking absolutely perfect. This is the new standard for all Godzilla films, or at least the ones with a serious tone. Not the dumb fun of all the versus movies, and that's not a knock at them at all. It's just that -1 has so much substance and depth to it. It's a film that really stays in your mind after watching it, and that just speaks volumes. Now for the final Godzilla film of both the current era, there is the legendary studio sequel to Godzilla vs. Kong called Godzilla Cross Kong: The New Empire, which came out in 2024. Now, this movie is pure popcorn action fun with Godzilla and Kong once again both fighting and then teaming up to fight against another couple of evil monsters. And once again, Kong takes another loss against Godzilla during their scuffle.
Oh, God damn you. I hate you, motherfucker. I wish you'd just fucking drop over and burst into fucking flames. God damn you. Just fuck you.
My fucking God. Seriously, can Legendary Studios just let Kong win one fucking fight against Godzilla? Yes, I know he does briefly manage to knock Godzilla out for about 10 seconds with the help of his new power glove. Yeah, that's right, Kong gets a fucking power glove in this movie, and it is satisfying as it was to see Kong literally give Godzilla the ground and pound MMA treatment. Godzilla proceeds to wake up like 10 seconds later, immediately overpower Kong, and was about to blow his fucking head off with the atomic breath if Mothra didn't show up to calm Godzilla the hell down and talk some sense into him. It is amazing that Mothra came back, and for Kong's sake, it's a good thing since he was about to get fucking roasted. I could hear Q right now rubbing it in my face, and I know he would be the one to point out to me and say something like, well, Kong needed a power glove to get the upper hand on Godzilla, and even then Godzilla still fucking overpowered him. Or he would say something along the lines like this.
Hold this L. Shut the fuck up.
But my point is that Godzilla ultimately came out the victor in their brief scuffle. That's why I'm fucking annoyed the writers and director won't let Kong get a full-fledged win against Godzilla. At best, he gets one round that goes to him in each movie before Godzilla starts fucking ragdolling him, and Godzilla always comes out the official victor in these fights against Kong in the new movies.
This is fucking bullshit. Okay? These fucking assholes, these fucking assholes! The fuck is their problem, man?
I'm sorry, I just want Kong to get one victory against Godzilla in the modern era. When he lost to Godzilla a third fucking time, it annoyed the absolute piss out of me.
You gotta be kidding me.
Deal with it, bitch. Take the L.
Damn it, Q, stop rubbing it in. Aside from that, the film's villain Scar King was really fun as an evil member of Kong's species who enslaved all the other Kongs, and his secret weapon in this other titan called Shimu, a dinosaur monster that literally can send the world into another ice age with her ice and cold powers. Her design also screams Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which was pretty damn awesome. Overall, it was a really fun movie, and I can't wait to see how crazy the American films are going to get, since they're a really fun throwback to the 60s and 70s era of Godzilla films. Well, that's every single live-action Godzilla film, and holy shit, that took forever. But there's more to come in this new segment where I'm going to talk about unmade Godzilla films that were proposed but never saw the light of day. So, let's get started, and fair warning, some of them are fucking bizarre. Getting into the unmade Godzilla films, I'm gonna name at least 5 unmade films that were planned or proposed officially, but never saw the light of day. There's so many more I could name, and I could do a whole episode talking about these unmade films alone in great detail, but this episode is already running long, so I'm only gonna name 5 and keep the description of the project short and to the point. So, let's get started. Unmade Godzilla Film 1 was the 1956 planned Bride of Godzilla, where the big guy was going to fall in love with a giant robot woman built by a mad scientist with the likeness of his foster daughter, and get killed when he tries to have sex with her when it's revealed it was all a big trap, and she self-destructs, killing them both. Yeah, this was an actual proposed idea for the sequel. We ended up with Godzilla Raids again instead, so it was probably for the best. Unmade Godzilla Film 2 was Frankenstein vs. Godzilla, planned for 1964. Godzilla was planned to be a hero one movie early in this original idea, and he was to fight a giant version of the Frankenstein monster that was destroying the Japanese countryside. And how did Frankenstein get to Godzilla size? Something about the atomic bomb irradiating him. Go figure. I honestly would have loved to have seen this, since I'm a huge fan of the Universal monsters, and Frankenstein fighting Godzilla sounds awesome. Funny thing about this is that originally King Kong was planned to fight Frankenstein first in 1960, and Willis O'Brien, Kong's creator, was the one that proposed it, and even made a sketch of it, but it unfortunately fell through the cracks. Unmade Godzilla Film 3 may be one of the best ideas that was ever proposed, which was Batman vs. Godzilla, planned for 1968. This was going to be the Adam West version of Batman, along with Burt Ward as Robin, with Batgirl and Commissioner Gordon along the way, and was served as a sequel to the 1960s Batman series movie that came out in '66. The story was Godzilla was being controlled by a German scientist who was mind-controlling Godzilla to attack Japan, and it's up to Batman, Robin, and Batgirl using their gadgets and bat vehicles to stop Godzilla. This would have been absolutely incredible, especially if they threw in some Batman series villains like Cesar Romero's Joker or Burgess Meredith's Penguin, or hell, even have Batman build a giant bat mecha and fight Godzilla. The fact that this wasn't made is a crime against humanity. Unmade Godzilla Film 4 was Godzilla vs. Ghost Godzilla, planned for 1995. It was going to feature the Heisei era Godzilla fighting the ghost of the 1954 Godzilla, who possessed the body of Godzilla Jr. and grown in size to match the current Godzilla. It was going to be planned to have a ghostly, nearly translucent white glow to him with all white eyes. This would have been fucking awesome, but Toho scrapped the idea since Godzilla already fought Space Godzilla and Mecha Godzilla and figured having Godzilla fighting a third version of himself would be too repetitive. And it's sad because it would have been very interesting and a throwback to the OG Godzilla film. And the final unmade Godzilla movie would have been the long-requested and severely overdue Godzilla vs. Gamera, proposed in 2002. The Japanese studio who owned Gamera, Daiyo, or Katoa as it was later called, I think, went to Toho, the studio that owned Godzilla, with the idea, and the rumor is it almost happened. Toho rejected the idea when it was proposed Gamera should win. Seriously, what the fuck was Toho smoking when they turned this down?
And I want to just slap these motherfuckers. They should be thrown screaming from helicopters in front of their fucking families.
Toho, you should seriously look in the fucking mirror and question your life for not having this mate at this point in the game. Like, come on now. Well, that's all for the unmade Godzilla films. Home stretch now. Let's get into the next segment where I list my top 10 favorite Godzilla monsters and 3 honorable mentions. Getting into my top 10 list of favorite Godzilla monsters that appeared in the Godzilla franchise. Note, Godzilla himself isn't on the list since he would obviously overshadow everybody on the list. So the list is going to go in order from least to most favorite, so here we go. Number 10, Hedorah, the pollution monster. He really could use another movie and would be perfect with a modern day coat of paint. Number 9, Ebra, the giant sea shrimp. He gets hated on unfairly. It was a fun giant monster, although he's much more suited as a King Kong enemy than a Godzilla enemy. Maybe a new movie can beef him up a bit in terms of powers, but I still like his design. It's fun. Number 8, Kumonga, the giant spider. Spiders are both cool and scary, so I don't even need to explain why he makes the list. Number 7, Gigan, the alien cyborg monster. His Cyclops eye and hook hands that are sometimes turned into chainsaws like it was in Godzilla Final Wars are just so damn cool. Number 6, Jet Jaguar, or Jaeger. I'm pretty sure it's Jaguar. You know what I mean. The size-changing robot superhero. Jet Jaguar is a clone of Ultraman, and I mean that as the highest compliment. Now, on to the upper half of the list, and you know these guys are special since I actually bothered to put in their roar in. Number 5, King Ghidorah. The world-destroying space dragon emperor. He needs no further explanation since his beef with Godzilla is legendary. Number 4, Biollante. The plant abomination. Biollante's design is godlike and she needs to have a MonsterVerse style update. Number 3, Mothra. The divine moth and the queen of the monsters. Mothra is one of the most loved and popular giant monsters of all time, and she's the peanut butter to Godzilla's jelly. I mean, hell, it's even joked in the MonsterVerse that they're an item, which, holy shit, talk about a power couple. Number 2, Rodan. The fire demon in the sky. Rodan always was cool as hell since flying dinosaurs are the best types of dinosaurs, and I always loved birds, especially bird monsters. Now, on to my number 1 favorite Godzilla monster and also my favorite Godzilla villain, and that is going to be... Hit the music.
Godzilla!
That's right, Mechagodzilla is my number one favorite Godzilla monster, and the reasons why are very simple. With the first being that Mechagodzilla is probably the biggest menace of the Godzilla franchise. Yes, even bigger than Ghidorah, and another monster I'm going to give a shout out to in the honorable mentions tag to this segment. Every single time, no matter what incarnation and backstory there is behind Mechagodzilla, he curb stomps Godzilla until Godzilla pulls a victory out by the skin of his teeth. Hell, I think he was the first monster to make Godzilla bleed like a faucet in his first two appearances. The other reason he's number one to me is that robot villains, and especially evil robotic versions of an existing character, are my favorite types of villains. Give all the strengths and powers of the hero with none of the weaknesses. Have them possess additional abilities by being armed to the teeth with weapons and robotic abilities on top of that. And most importantly, strip away all the humanity of said heroic character and give the sole purpose of their creation being to kill said hero. And what do you have? A soulless killing machine that can't be reasoned with, feels no pain, no remorse, no doubt, and no fear, and that will not rest and will not stop until they are destroyed or the hero is killed by their hand. Mechagodzilla is the Terminator of the Godzilla franchise, especially when he's a villain, when the humans or aliens can't control Mechagodzilla and it seems like he has a mind of his own.
It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear, and it absolutely will not stop, ever, until you are dead.
Thank you, Kyle Reese from Terminator. Those are my top 10 monsters, so here are my 3 honorable mentions. Number 3, Zilla from the 1998 American film. Okay, I know I'm going to get some backlash to this one, but hear me out. Now, I know Zilla's got a lot of hate when he first appeared since he's no true Godzilla, but over the years I've really warmed up to his design, which is cool in its own right. Plus, the animated series really made his design much more popular. Number 2, Destroyer from Godzilla vs. Destroyer. Now, he was fighting Ghidorah for the number 5 spot, but Ghidorah just beat him out for it. Destroyer is also one of the most dangerous monsters Godzilla ever faced in his history. Now, on to my number 1 honorable mention is... Hit it.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Kong, the 8th wonder of the world!
Yeah, that's right, the legend himself, specifically the MonsterVerse interpretation of the character. Now, the reason why he wasn't on the top 10 is the same exact reason Godzilla wasn't. He would just overshadow literally everyone on the list even more than Godzilla, since King Kong is my number 1 favorite giant monster, with Godzilla being a very close second. The emotional depth they give Kong in the MonsterVerse with his relationships with humans, the ability to communicate through sign language, and his borderline human-like mannerisms just make him lovable instantly. He, along with his species in the MonsterVerse, are designated as Alpha Titans, which means they're on the top of the pyramid when it comes to the hierarchy of giant monsters in the world, just like Godzilla and his species are designated as Alpha Titans, which explains why they're rivals. The most impressive thing about this is the Kong species are one of the rare mammal giant kaiju in the MonsterVerse, and they don't possess any special ability like Godzilla's atomic ray, Ghidorah's lightning, Rodan's heat immunity, or Mothra's implied magic. They're just really tough giant apes, but they're listed as Alpha Titans since it's explained they're one of the most intelligent species out there and they could use their tools and strategize like human beings compared to the other dinosaur or insect-like giant monsters. And this is seen repeatedly with Kong using the environment, planning traps and ambushes to other giant monsters. He simply can't overpower, or wielding an actual axe made out of a Godzilla dorsal spike, which kind of serves as a big fuck you to Godzilla, since Kong is literally wielding a weapon made out of one of Godzilla's fellow members of his species, which probably explains why he got so triggered in the China fight against Kong when Kong stabbed the absolute shit out of his leg and then tried to take his head off with it in the fight. I mean, hell, I'd be pissed too, so I really can't blame Godzilla for flipping his shit and absolutely wrecking Kong at the end. Granted, it was painful for me to watch because I was rooting for Kong, but, I mean, it is what it is. I'm not mad. Kong should have won that goddamn fight.
Hold this L.
Shut the fuck up.
Sorry, I had to get that out of my system. So, in closing, Kong is one of the best giant monsters in not only his own series, but Godzilla's as well. That's all for the monster rankings. Now, let's get into the final segment where I rank my top 10 favorite Godzilla films from least to most favorite. Starting off with number 10 on my list of my top 10 favorite Godzilla movies is King Kong vs. Godzilla 1962. Number 9 is The Return of Godzilla that came out in 1984. Number 8 is the original 1954 Gojira. Number 7 is Godzilla vs. Mothra that came out in 64. Number 6 is Godzilla Cross Kong, The New Empire that came out in 2024. Now on to the upper half of the list at number 5, which is Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster that came out in 66. Number 4 is Son of Godzilla, coming out the following year at 67. Number 3 is Godzilla King of the Monsters that came out in 2019. Number 2 is Godzilla vs. Kong at 2021, which was the release date. And at number 1, as my favorite Godzilla film ever out of all of them, is Godzilla -1. Was there ever any doubt? This movie is a modern-day masterpiece, and I've repeatedly gave it praise every single time I brought it up in this episode. It is the perfect Godzilla movie and truly is a work of cinematic art that will be looked at with high praise for decades to come, just like the original Gojira film. Matter of fact, I'm going to go as far as to say that it is better than the original Gojira.
What the fuck did you just assault my ears with?
Yes, I stand by that statement as bold as it is. And not just from a technical point of view, its emotional beats hit me even harder than the originals, and the characters, while very good in the OG, Godzilla -1's characters beat them out by a mile in terms of being more interesting. My favorite scene in the entire film is the attack on the city when Godzilla stops in his tracks and the citizens start looking up at him wondering what he's doing. The music starts taking a foreboding tone. Then we hear the ominous hum of Godzilla's atomic breath being charged, and his dorsal spikes not only begin to light up blue starting from his tail all the way to his body, but they spring out like a machine rod or a cannon being loaded. I read somewhere this is supposed to represent control rods used in nuclear power plants or their inner mechanism of a nuclear fission type weapon, which is a great detail. And as they do this, the citizens' expressions turn from curiosity to growing horror as they sense something terrible was about to happen. The music starts to swell as the hum of Godzilla's atomic breath is being charged to the absolute max. Godzilla takes a huge inhale of breath, but then for the tiniest fraction of a second, the music cuts right when Godzilla's spikes go back in his body like a gun trigger, and Godzilla lets loose his atomic breath that acts as a literal atomic bomb in this movie. And the force of the blast completely blows the citizens away, causing an unholy amount of destruction and death. An iconic shot of Godzilla roaring like an absolute demon from hell while being dwarfed by the atomic mushroom cloud he created. Just listen to the audio of it. It's about 30 seconds. Take a listen. That was such an unforgettable moment in the theater, and you could feel the shock and awe amongst everybody watching it, including myself. The only other Godzilla film that made me actually fear Godzilla, like the monster he is, would be Shin Godzilla, with a similar terrifying atomic breath scene that's played for horror. But this one right here in Godzilla Minus One is truly the best one ever out of all the Godzilla films. Overall, this film is the new gold standard all future Godzilla films will be measured up to in the foreseeable future, and I cannot fucking wait to see what's new. Well, guys, that was the last segment, and this is the end of the episode. I really hope you enjoyed listening to me yap about Godzilla for God knows how long. This went on way longer than I thought it would, but then again, I probably should have figured that out since there's 38 movies as of now in the series, so I probably should have anticipated that. I mean, I love the character in the franchise, and Godzilla will forever be one of the most legendary monsters in all of fiction. Thank you all for listening, and I want to repeat this episode as being dedicated to my Uncle Steve and Uncle Buck. Thanks for being amazing uncles. I love you both so much, and thank you for bringing this incredible franchise in my life I hold so dearly in my heart. So until next episode, this has been Adam the Movie Guy, and see you next time.